So there is so much to talk about with natural selection. There are so many different ways to approach the problem, and there have been so many approaches. But Fodor's hat, okay, the reason I put that up is like, okay, if I were writing a Netflix movie, I would end it without you knowing what happened to the people that were, in the drama all along, and you'd have to kind of make up your own ideas and ending. So for Fodor's hat, just know that this evolution thing was kind of one of the last things that Fodor did, and he got slammed left and right. And then he died. Imagine he died of pneumonia, or if your head wants to go to he should have wore his hat, or he should have stayed under his fucking hat and kept his mouth shut. Whatever you want to read into it, that's what Fodor's hat is about. So, I don't know.
Yeah, right on.
The man did a lot of work, and I think as near as I can figure, and I don't know much about his language work. I just heard, rumors there was this whole language of thought thing that they were trying to put forth. And there's something called mental representationalism, that where, people believe that if you see something, you have a representation in your mind, that your mind is then viewing somehow. And a lot of philosophers, including myself, hate that, hate representationalism. But I think Fodor was on the side of that, and he was against something called teleosemantics. Teleosemantics is kind of an odd one. The view that the notion of representation should be defined with respect to biological function, and that there's a whole lot there to unpack. But anyway, but I think I wanted to play. I want to play. I mean, it isn't like old Speed of Sound is the only one that finds Fodor and Danny's arguments bad. I can't think of I couldn't find another biologist other than his co-author that defended him. So,
well, there's a lot of people that think that his ideas are worth considering, but I don't think many biologists consider. Take it seriously. I agree with that.
Yeah. And anyway, I just wanted to play this part here from this Alex Rosenberg, and he claims to be a scientism advocate, just like myself. And he's the only other person I found, other than myself, that will claim that scientism is the way to go, which I thought was interesting. But I kind of like Alex. There's a few things that the way he comes up with a few things I sort of disagree with, and I think he sort of hand waves a few things. But this guy is pretty brilliant. But anyway, we'll play this. See if you can hear it.
To summarize, it's just a mistake to suppose that the theory of natural selection should be replete with generalizations about what ecological variables, and here I'm quoting Jerry, what ecological variables determine the relative fitness of phenotypes. Jerry says, quote, the idea is that it's ecological laws that apply by virtue of a creature's exogenous relations that support counterfactuals about which traits the creature would be selected for if it had them. No, no, no. Jerry, you don't understand biology. In Fodor speak, biology is a science without its own proprietary laws. In fact, all of the special sciences are sciences without proprietary laws. Now we've settled Jerry's hash, the one he made of the theory of natural selection on its home base of phylogenetic evolution, we can go back to his original arguments against teleosemantics and consider what.
So I think his assault started on teleosemantics, and then he ended up at the end of his book and his paper from 2008, basically making it an attack on something he called Darwinism, right? And so debating Darwin, how Jerry Fodor slid down the slippery slope to anti-Darwinism. And this whole idea of Darwinism, we hear this from the creationists all the time. It's like some Frankensteinian version of what Darwin said, 150 years ago. And it just doesn't make a lot of sense in modern evolutionary theory. And this attack on natural selection specifically, like, what do you think a theory is? Like, what should a theory do? Have you thought about it?
Well, there's like the scientific theory, and then there's like the colloquial term of a theory. But certainly, a scientific theory is, once it's higher than a hypothesis, that it's a collection of validated hypotheses and a accumulation of many different validated hypotheses that come together to form a cohesive theory on a particular scientific facet. So a theory is a very well-established structure that is based on validated hypotheses. That's what I would say.
Yeah. And then, the one version of a theory is that it's a generator, that it generates statements. And it takes input and generates statements that you would generate true propositions or hypotheses, and then you would test them, right? That sort of thing. So you get some input. So a little thing here that, hearts have been selected. Okay, that's one statement that could be generated. And then Jerry likes to talk about the thump of the heart has been selected for.
Yeah.
And the pump of the heart has been selected for, or the thump has been selected against, or the pump has been selected against.
Well, but isn't his position that like you cannot distinguish between these coextensive traits, like that's
right?
That's it's the selection of versus the selection for, which is what he argues against, which is the natural selection, that there's no distinguishing factor between the selection of the heart pumping the blood or the beating of the heart.
Yeah. And my point is that it's a straw man, because those things I have highlighted there are not things that we would expect natural selection itself or the version of natural selection to generate. It's not going to generate those statements. It's not expected to. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, I would agree with that.
What you can say, like if you look at all mammals and you see hearts in every single mammal, I mean, there isn't one outlier. There isn't one mammal that doesn't have a heart. Then you can say hearts have been selected. Okay, and that's something you can get from basically the empirical evidence of looking at a population and looking across a number of different species, and we'll find this one thing, and we know that they all have hearts, period. Why does Jerry insist that we have to break that down into these coextensive traits?
Well, do you know? Have you ever heard of I think it's called Sober's sieve.
Sober's sieve.
It's a thought experiment constructed by this guy named Sober to address this issue of selection for or selection of. Sober's sieve. So like a sieve, like with that you sift out rocks that are bigger or smaller, etc.
Right.
So Sober's sieve is about if you have rocks that are that the coextensive traits are rocks that are of the same size and of the same color.
Right.
That the sieve lets through rocks of a certain size. But are you selecting for the size? Or are you selecting for the color? Because there's a coextensive trait aspect between the color of the rocks and the size of the rocks. And so under Fodor's theory, like that you can't distinguish between whether the rocks are being selected for by the size or the color, but we know that the sieve has certain sizes in it which allow us to identify that rocks are being sorted by their size. And so there's been a bunch of back and forth on this, but I think that it's a good analogy of this coextensive trait aspect. And Fodor has some arguments against that thought experiment, but Sober's got some pretty good responses to it. So I'm just saying that's one way people think about that topic.
Right. So now Danny said to me, and he said this over and over, and I think Fodor does say this. Fodor thinks that any theory of evolution has to articulate principles connecting ecological variables and phenotypes. And I say, no. He doesn't know anything about biology. It's not supposed to do that. That's not what natural selection does.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, it's the connection between the ecological pressures and the random mutations are there's no intentionality there. There's no connection between those two from a physical process perspective. We have these mutations that are occurring randomly, and they're just occurring external to like what's going on with these evolutionary or these ecological environmental pressures. And it's just that the environmental pressures have a relationship with those because of the fitness aspect of being able to select for animals that are going to reproduce more. So there's not really a connection between those two. It's only that one operates. There is a relationship, but they're not like there's a model that connects those two.
Yeah. So first of all, this bit about intention with an S and intention, right? Okay, now if I were to describe this set that I have here of all these objects, I would put out each individual set, 3, the triangle 3, the triangle 1, 2, 4, whatever, and I would list every one of them, and that's called an extension. That means you can pick out whatever one you want, right? But intentionally, I could say, okay, this set consists of, or a set consists of all circles. Okay, and then I would have this bigger line out here where, and I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, you can't. Okay, the bigger circle has all circles, right?
Yep.
But then with intention with an S, when you add and terms, if I say circle and red, the set becomes smaller. But with extension, if I were to add another triangle, it gets bigger. So those two things are kind of the opposite of each other. So extensionality and intentionality. And from that, basically in language and semantics, the word intention with an S is meant to be something where you describe like Jason is the guy named Jason wearing a gray shirt and sitting behind the mic. You keep adding terms until you pick out that one particular term, that sort of thing. So that's the first thing. But then on Sober's sieve here, okay, you've got this population, this first population, right, which consists of all these different things. And then you go out and you look at this other population, and we have like some green triangles and some green circles. And we don't really know whether it was selecting triangles or circles or green. Or well, we know that it was. We're not entirely sure what's being selected here because we have a lot of circles compared to triangles. So it could be selecting for circles, right? They're all green except for this one red one. So we don't know for sure if it's green. But I mean, all of that hashes out. But the thing you can tell about this, okay, you can tell that there are more circles that are green than anything else. And you come to a full stop there because that's all you can know without going to other principles in other areas of biology or the history of this organism. But if you go a few populations ahead, you look ahead 20 generations and you find all green circles, okay? Now you pretty much know something about it being green circles. Okay, you can't go any finer than that.
Well, you could say, like, I'll argue Danny's point. You could say, is it the green or the circles?
You don't know. and you don't know.
So I'm not sure that's the case. I'm not sure that's the case. I mean, I think a biologist would say we do know, because we can evaluate the totality of the environment to see, like, because we're talking about the fitness. We're talking about like the likelihood of an animal or species, whatever, like having higher amount of reproducibility. Like their fitness is increased based on whatever combination of mutations and the environmental selection that's going on result in those animals that are reproducing more. But we can make some interpretations as to what is increasing the fitness. Like what, like as an example, like they use examples like giraffes, like a giraffe's neck, like a giraffe that can reach up to get the leaves more has the, you know, so the natural selection is selecting for those mutations which result in a longer neck. So if we've got like longer neck and a neck that is colored a certain color, like, well, which one is natural selection selecting for? Well, we can make some assessments around that in terms of what is the resultant aspect that may have increased the fitness of that animal. So while, like, from a thought experiment, I understand what we're saying, but from a realistic perspective, I think we can make valid interpretations as to why natural selection is doing what it's doing. So
exactly, and here's why. Okay, suppose we had this situation where there was just one off yellow circle, right? And then a few generations later, well, they're still all circles. So now they're all circles, but some of them, like the yellow ones, are increasing kind of randomly. They're drifting, right? So now it appears that color is neutral, because across the population, we'll find yellow, green, and we might find red, and we might find orange, but we're always going to find circles from here on out. So now we know that the circle is important. So you can tell, looking across populations, what is neutral and what's not. And the reality is, this is what we're dealing with right here, right? Okay, we have strings of nucleotides that we're looking at overall. And when you look at these nucleotides across a human, chimp, mouse, rat, and cow, you're going to see these areas in I think in gray, that are highly conserved all the time for every member of the population, right? And then you're going to see these areas that are just somewhat conserved, and they might be conserved on the structure of the amino acid or whatever, and then semi-conserved, but you're going to see drift in part of this. So now we know for a fact that this has been selected, that these areas that are conserved have been selected. And what you got to do is separate that ecological concern. We end up coming up with these just so stories, sometimes very early on or too early on in the analysis. And we get hung up on those just so stories, and we start thinking this trait was selected for. Okay, that's it. No, it was selected, period. Full stop, period. When you get into the selected for, you're already dipping into intentionality, and with a T, and you shouldn't. Okay. So what we look at is these populations, and when you look at these statistical variations, you can tell a ton about this. And then when you look, you look across different populations of the same species, that will give you a ton of statistical information. But then when you look across species, within types like mammals, that gives you a hell of a lot more. And the interesting thing about this is you got to go back and look at what natural selection actually is, okay? And I would characterize natural selection as the abstract mathematics behind modeling various populations and standard ecologies. And this math is law-like. You can model this with computers, so it is law-like.
Okay. I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that definition, but there's a variety of definitions of natural selection. And actually I have a paper on this that I can talk about if you want. But,
Gregory?
Great. Yeah. Did I send that to you?
No, I actually had that one from.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Gregory's paper is really good. So.
Yeah, but the thing is that it all boils down to what is actually happening in life, right? And life today, okay, eukaryotic life as we know it, and even prokaryotic life. Well, not so much prokaryotes. We'll get to that. For one thing, multiple copies are made at variable rates depending on the individual structure. Okay, so something about the individual is going to allow a certain number of copies of itself to be made, and it can be more than one. It can be hundreds. It can be 0.2. It can be whatever. Fidelity is very high in this copying process, but it cannot be perfect for evolution to work. Okay, but it has to be very high. In eukaryotes and mammals, it is very high. And the population level is what you're looking at. So almost every version of natural selection you look at will have these elements. They'll talk about reproduction with fidelity. They don't often mention that the fidelity has to be high, but not perfect.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Now here's an interesting thing. When we go back before eukaryotic cells happened and became, dominant, at least in size, before multicellular animals happened, it was more of a fucking zoo back then. Okay, there was less fidelity, and when you go back further and further in abiogenesis, the fidelity at one point was zero. There was no fidelity. There was just the fact that some sort of a membrane or cell of some type, be it geological or hydrocarbons, formed around populations of proteins. Okay, and so back then it was more of a zoo, and things were not constrained. And from that, we had a network of things that was extremely large. And natural selection picked its way through that network by random chance. It didn't, to say it picked is even getting too intentional. Okay, it just happened to turn out that this particular pathway got picked. But once you pick the pathway, like if you look at mammals today, most of the genetic environment of a mammal is internal to the mammal itself. So when you're looking at environments, evolution wouldn't work out very well if environments radically changed every single day. Okay, if we went to high carbon dioxide, then back to high oxygen the next day, then it got to be 300 degrees, and it got to be 40 degrees, life wouldn't work, right? So one of the things that happens is that one of the things that we have on Earth is that the environments evolve very slowly. Environments stick around for for a long period of time, right? Most of the time. Okay. Now, when you look at multicellular animals, what they have done is they have created their own internal environment. And Richard Lewontin makes a big point of this, that most of the environment we grow up in, we constructed ourselves. So we are self-constructing our environment around us. So now natural selection and evolution proceeds very slowly, rather than what we had back in the Cambrian. There were many more pathways, and there was far less fidelity and far less environmental encapsulation. So we were able to rapidly expand, right? And come up with these different body plans. Once these body plans were fixed, like mammals, we all have mammary glands, we all have hearts, we all have livers, we all have kidneys. Most in our kidneys exist inside of us. So if you're looking at the natural population growth and selection of a kidney, or the development of a kidney, the kidney is developing inside of an environment that the organism itself has constructed. And that's kind of key in this whole thing, right? So what we're looking at is how across populations genetics changes. Okay, and we don't care whether a heart's thumping or pumping or whatever the fuck it's doing until you get to the other parts of the theory. Okay. Now, one more key point I want to bring up is that for every different genetic type, like diploid, haploid, whatever, different recombination of it, you're going to end up with different population genetics mathematics. Okay. Like overlapping generations, and just all of this stuff comes into play. So the theory, the mathematics of the theory become very complex on their own, okay, without bringing in any ecological or embryological considerations. And so this onslaught, this assault on evolution and calling it nothing but natural history is just, it is a straw man. I mean, it's just much more complicated than that. Like, what the hell was I going to say? There's a point I wanted to make, another one I wanted to bring up. And it was important. Buoyancy in fish shapes, species within estimated biotheories. There's generators, intention, it don't matter. Oh, shit. I lost my thought.
Go back to like your definition of natural selection.
Yep.
I just want to read it again. Natural selection is the abstract mathematics behind modeling various populations in standard ecologies. Okay, I just would not use that as a definition. I mean, I don't know why.
What would you do?
I would just use like the standard definitions. Like I was just reading through like these examples that have been given of natural selection of fitness in Gregory, like differential net production of genetically distinct entities, the process by which genotypes with higher fitness increase in the frequency of a population, differential survival and reproduction of classes or entities that differ in one another differ in one or more characteristics. I mean, ultimately, it's this combination of random mutation of genes. So we have mutations occurring that are completely random, have nothing to do with the environment. And then there's environmental pressures that are occurring, which are not random, which are related to fitness, which are slowly over time differentiating based on those mutations to slowly but surely over large numbers of populations vary those frequencies of those genes, which result in phenotype differences. So I mean, that's just like the most basic understanding of it.
Yeah, I think this is more basic, and I think it covers all those points. So multiple copies are made at variable rates depending on the individual structure.
What do you mean, like? Okay, I don't understand this. Multiple copies of what? Multiple copies of what? What do you say?
Multiple copies of the organism.
So, okay. Organisms are reproducing.
Right, reproducing.
Okay.
Organisms are reproducing at variable rates. Okay, I may make one child, I may make 15.
Okay, that's fitness.
Right.
The level of fitness. Those are varying levels of
fertility
fitness.
And fertility times viability.
And that fitness is dependent upon the environmental pressures that are occurring. More animals are going, like, the most basic examples of like animal X is like, when Darwin's talking about the survival of the fittest, which is kind of a bullshit term, but he's really it's a combination of like likelihood of survival in the environment and the estimated reproducibility. So that's kind of what you're talking about here. Like we have animals that some are reproducing more than others.
Right.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Okay, so I added structure plus environment, so that covers
that. Fair enough. All right.
Fidelity is high but not perfect, and that's what mutation is. Okay, I make a copy of myself, but my kids don't look like me exactly. They're a little bit different, and they're fuckheads.
Well, but like I don't need, like I just feel like when you say fidelity is high but not perfect, I don't know really what that means when you say what's perfect.
Perfect fidelity,
like no mutations.
Right. What would happen is the first organism is all we would have on the earth. It would dominate the entire earth. There would be nothing else.
I mean, but keep in mind, like the mutations that are occurring are like completely oblivious to the environment. Mutations are just fucking occurring. Like they're like that. Those are randomly occurring. There is and those are happening over here, and environmental pressures are occurring, and the environmental pressures are and the relationship to the environment affect what the fitness is and so that it's essentially operating on those random mutations. Random mutations are occurring, and in some situations, in that exact moment, some of those mutations will ensure that an animal will be more fit, and then those mutations get passed down.
Right. And when you get into population genetic thinking, though, you hold that environment constant for some period of time. Okay. You don't look at an environment that changes constantly. So of course, we have to consider that, but we're not considering that now. We're just considering what would happen if the environment were fixed. If we bracket the environment and say, okay, let's say it's fixed for 1,000 years, the environment doesn't change. Okay. And when you look, and that is a situation for humans. We have roughly the same oxygen, the same environment for 1,000 years. Okay. And then we have this random, oh shit, what happened to my definition? We have this random mutation. Basically, mutation has nothing to do with anything. It's just chance. There's going to be variation in that population, but the variation is going to be very tiny. It's not going to be drastic. Now, consider what would happen if there was no such thing as natural selection. Okay, that means that any mutation would basically reproduce at the same rate as every other mutation. Okay, so there would be exactly the same rate. What would happen to a species is you'd have 7 arms and tentacles coming out of your head, and I wouldn't. And I'd have 3 arms. And every variation would make it into the population, but that isn't what happens. We look at a species or a population that's been in this environment, which is changing very slowly, and we see this consistency among its members. We see this one thing, these traits that are conserved, and that allows us to say, these are human beings, or these are chimpanzees, or whatever. So, I mean, so the fidelity is high but not perfect is really important in natural selection, and it isn't often pointed out. It's a quirk of mine that I pointed out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point, because a lot of the papers on natural selection talk about this topic of kind of the population genetics aspect of where these changes are very minimal, but they are occurring over long periods of time, and over time and you can get, like, remember, while the fitness aspect are furthering mutations, which are seen as beneficial at that moment in time, right, that other mutations are then occurring. And so it's not like, as we go from generation to generation to generation, there are additional mutations potentially occurring. And so it's not like it's just a really clean, like, only the good ones are going forward. There's kind of a heterogeneous aspect that right, ensures that it's not a perfect, like you're saying, the fidelity is not perfect. So that's constantly happening. And so it's kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And so that's happening over a long period of time.
Yeah. And there are a lot of beneficial mutations that end up drifting out of the population.
Correct.
But then that depends on population size. Population geneticists like to think about infinite size populations, right? So they don't. But we have bottlenecks. We have small populations. And when you have bottlenecks, all of a sudden that drift or that randomness is up for grabs. But when you look at the statistics in a population, you can actually go back and detect that bottleneck even. I mean, we can see a whole lot of stuff like that. And it's all from statistics. And that is what natural selection is about. And it's not strictly about probability. I kind of, the probabilistic or the statistical evolutionists or whatever, I kind of push back on them a little bit. It's a little more subtle than that, right? But there is a statistical aspect to this whole thing as it moves through these environments. And I lost my train of thought again. The train went off the rails.
I'm looking at this Gregory paper, and he has a section in here about survival of the fittest, why it's misleading, and he has a section called
horrible thing.
Yeah, I agree. Can I share my screen? Do you mind?
Yeah. Well, I've got highlights in that paper.
It's on page 159. Yeah, if you want to pull it up, it's fine. You don't have to. I mean, I'm just. I think the papers, if anybody's really interested in this topic, I think it's a really great paper for basic understandings of natural selection.
Oh shit, I'm shaking. I got a blood sugar situation with my hand and I can't fucking hit anything with my mouse. Hate that when that happens. Okay, here's the Gregory paper.
Oh, okay. So it's on page 159.
God,
so
fucking people, stop it. Okay.
So I think it's like 4 pages down.
4 pages down, like right there.
Yeah, go down a little bit further. See where it says which traits are most fit. Yeah, right there. Can you increase the font size of your screen?
Let's see. Okay, I can make it. I can put us this way.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
So it's like right here it says which traits are most fit. Directional natural selection can be understood as a process by which fitter traits or genes increase in proportion within populations over the course of many generations. Okay, duh. It must be understood that the relative fitness of different traits depends on the current environment. Thus, traits that are fit now may become unfit later if the environment changes. Conversely, traits that have become fit may have been present long before the current environment arose without having conferred any advantage under previous conditions. I don't know if I read that right. Conversely, traits that have now become fit may have been present long before the current environment arose without having conferred any advantage under previous conditions. Finally, it must be noted that fitness refers to reproductive success relative to alternatives here and now. Right. Natural selection cannot increase the proportion of traits solely because they may someday become advantageous. So I think that's a very important aspect about understanding fitness and understanding its applications across these populations like you're talking about. I don't know if that section makes sense or not, but it's kind of
that does. Yeah. Directional natural selection. Yeah, and but you understand when you talk about these things, when I say hold the environment constant, you have to separate the concerns. Otherwise, it gets to be weeds. And I think that's kind of what Fodor is doing, is saying it's all weeds. So we should throw out natural selection and we should just think of it as history, right? We're writing about a history. Well, that isn't what we do. We observe populations changing right now, or we will model populations, in some ideal and figure out how, and that's how we figure out the history. We can see what likely happened because of natural selection. But to say that things are not selected is just insane, because like I say, if things were not selected, you and I wouldn't have 4 limbs. I mean, you and I would have a vast array of different characteristics.
Well, but I think Fodor's argument, and Danny has talked about this, is again, like I was saying, is that he believes that the coextensive traits result in being indistinguishable. Like they're so indistinguishable that we can't identify what is actually being selected for.
And I say to that, who cares? Okay, who cares? The embryologist cares. The ecologist cares. We don't. That's not what we're talking about.
So I don't know what iron chariot here. The question: do you think the immune system dictates natural selection?
No. My knee-jerk reaction is no, but I might want to think longer about that.
I don't know. I don't understand the question. Or is he asking? I'm not sure. Are they asking? Is the immune system in its current form a result of natural selection, or that does the process of immunity and the immune system operates and uses a natural selection mechanism as part of the immune response? I guess I don't understand if it's which one of those questions it is.
I think I would take exception to the phrase dictates natural selection, because nothing really dictates it other than itself. I mean, it's the evolving process, the mathematics of the process itself is what's doing all the dictating. But when you look down into the details, you're not going to be able to say that something was dictated. That's the same as saying something was selected for. And I push back on that term selected for. I mean, overall, the process of natural selection is based on these really precise mathematical elements of copies with less than perfect fidelity, but near perfect, and variable copies, and that's it. That's mathematics, right? That's law.
You see that sentence like above where the section where it says which traits are most fit. If it's that they're talking about fitness, but again, the last sentence it says, however, again, this misinterprets the modern meaning of fitness, which can be both predicted in terms of which traits are expected to be successful in a specific environment and measured in terms of the actual reproductive success of that environment. So
yeah.
I think that's if you're thinking about fitness and actually what's going on. And remember, when we're talking about the actual environmental factors or pressures, we can evaluate that and measure it based on the reproductive success. The prediction is it's which animals are going to be most successful, but the result of that in the measurement of it is the reproducibility of the animal.
Right. But there are a lot of surprises in these, these predictions.
I mean, I think that like you're bringing up a good point of time in that these gradual processes, and because remember, environmental factors are not fixed, even though I understand to understand this process, one way of doing it is to fix the environmental factors. And to kind of like fix one factor and let the other factor vary, and to look at that variance over time if the assumption is the environmental factors are fixed. And the reason we do that is because if we didn't do that, the system becomes an infinitely more complex environment, and it's harder to understand. But the reality is that's what's actually happening, and there are a lot of complexities that when you combine those interactions that are occurring, that lots of things can happen, like just like what we were talking about, like with mutations which were perceived as beneficial become deleterious.
Yeah.
And new mutations that are occurring, or mutations that were deleterious that have existed for a while, they're just hanging around, suddenly become beneficial.
Yeah.
So based on the changes in the environment. So those are that level of complexity makes the system very complicated to understand, and people lose the understandings of natural selection based on that complexity. That's what
the thing I'm moving toward more and more in molecular biology, it's an intuitive theory, but I'm moving towards something that I might call a theory someday, is that all of these neutral, I mean, there are just a tremendous amount of neutral changes over things that are beneficial or deleterious, right? Okay, so there's a lot of neutral changes going on. There's a lot of biochemical pathways that don't go anywhere right now. And at some future point with more mutation and a different environment, or changes in the changes in the environment is almost the same as mutation, as what effect it has. So with that combination of things, a lot of these neutral pathways, or some of them, 1 out of 100,000, is going to result in a new beneficial, I hate the word beneficial, basically a new viable pathway, that is going to end up getting into the population and spreading. And right now we have a whole bunch of molecular biology that's happening inside of us that just wastes energy. It doesn't do anything. Creates proteins that get broken down, creates proteins that, fit into a pathway and don't go anywhere. And at some future point, some fraction of those things may end up becoming viable. And those things are going to rapidly fix in the population.
I mean, isn't this the argument that many folks like Standing for Truth make about like the number of deleterious or non-beneficial mutations, and that they see that as like, given that's some support for their intentionality perspective?
And that's why they're wrong, because most of these mutations are neutral. They're not going to be selected against. They're not going to be selected, right? They're not going to fix in the population. They're not going to be selected against. they're neutral, and there's a ton of them. I mean, there's millions of them, and because there are so many of them, it's just chance that some of them are going to fit in at some future date in some future ecology,
Well,
or with some additional mutation.
Well, it's not. It's. I mean, I wouldn't say it's chance. I would say that it's random that they exist, but the environmental processes. That this is the non-random part, which is that over time there's a small number of members of a species that are going to have increased fitness based on those beneficial mutations. Now, and it could have been like in the past, those beneficial mutations they conferred no value in terms of the fitness of the animal, but suddenly there's a slight increase in that fitness, and that slight increase over a gradual period of time is going to result in more of those species being around with those genes, so more of those genes increasing, so it starts to snowball, like you were saying. So I just think that is so beautiful. It's such a I don't want to use the word magic, but it's a very amazing process. And to try to imply intentionality or anthropomorphize the process, when in reality the process is already beautiful in its beautiful unguided approach, I just think is the height of ignorance.
That process is what created, or basically is where human minds came from. And human minds are the ones with intentionality and meaning.
Yeah.
And I mean, but it came from life itself. And when the creationists say there's no other example of something like life, they're exactly right about that. Life is this odd phenomena based, I think, on carbon chemistry entirely. That if you were to pick one thing, that would be it. It would be the complexity of carbon chemistry. Life is the only phenomena that's doing this shit. Right? We can't find any other examples in physical systems that are doing this stuff. At least we haven't yet. So
I was responding to Topdawg in the chat.
It's the word majestic you were trying to say. I'm not sure.
Anyway. Yeah, I was just I was trying to use a term that did not imply supernatural, magical. I mean, I guess majestic is okay, you know.
Well, the only version of magic that believers have ever come up with is humans doing something with their minds. I haven't heard of any really good definition of supernatural that doesn't involve humans thinking about something, or a human like something thinking about something and making it happen. A ghost moves, rattles chains in your hallway. It's always a fucking mind all the way down.
So I guess I hate to use Standing for Truth as an example, but I just know he is a obvious, like a person that's constantly talking about this as an argument for God, for creationism, etc. Like, I'm assuming they do not accept the approach of natural selection whatsoever. Like, do they consider it as a valid method or a thing that occurs? Or?
No, they think God planned all the variation. He built it. He built it into the original organisms, and they'll go along with evolution happens, but it's because God planned to make it happen that way. Right? He put the genes in. He put all of these neutral genes in that are later on going to become beneficial. The ones I'm talking about. So that's kind of what they believe, that it's, God all the way down. God's tiny little fingers. But all they're really doing is imagining superhumans. They're imagining Superman. The Superman comic explains a lot about religion. We imagine a man. Well, what if the man could pick up anything, right? The earth, the cars. What if he could go really fast? What if his eyes could cut metal? I mean, that's all religion is this anthropomorphic rendition of the world somehow. God, is that the hubris of that? That's what kills me about religion, is thinking that we little human beings are the thing that wags the entire fucking universe. I hate it. Anyway.
There's hold on, I want to find this section in this paper that talks about this. Just give me a second.
Anthropomorphic.
Yeah, exactly. It's page 168. It's 13 pages down.
Okay. Oh, where am I at here? 160.
It's kind of a long section, but like I see Otangelo's in the side chat.
Okay, I thought this was okay. Is this 168 right here?
I can't see your screen.
Oh shit! Oh, I have to fix that. Okay, is this it?
Yeah, it's the page above it.
Page above it
is where it starts. Oh no, go down. No, I'm sorry, you're right. Yeah,
table.
It's right there. See down there, so anthropomorphism and intentionality. That's the beginning of the section.
Yeah, internal anthropomorphism or intentionality. Okay, can you read that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Like, where's I can read fast. So it's like a related conceptual bias in teleology is anthropomorphism, in which human-like conscious intent is ascribed either to the objects of natural selection or the process itself. In this sense, anthropomorphic misconceptions can be characterized as either internal, attributing adaptive change to the intentional actions of organisms, or external, conceived of natural selection or nature as a conscious agent.
Right. Yeah, that natural selection is doing something, or Mother Nature is doing. Well, that's what Fodor started with, is he says, you're either going to say Mother Nature did it, or
something external to Mother Nature.
Yeah. And that's what he was pushing back against. But
it says internal anthropomorphism or intentionality is intimately tied to the misconception that individual organisms evolve in response to changes imposed by the environment, rather than recognizing evolution as a population level process. This is kind of what you were talking about, Speedy.
Yeah.
And then he says, Stephen Gould describes the obvious appeal of such intuitive notions as follows. And then they give a quote by Gould, but Gould totally, he didn't, there was a bunch of stuff that Gould didn't have really knowledge of at that time. I don't want to read what Gould said. The penchant for seeing conscious intent is often sufficiently strong as it is applied not only to the non-human vertebrates, but also to plants and even single-celled organisms. Thus, the adaptations of any taxon may be described as innovations, inventions, or solutions. I don't know if this is relevant. Even the evolution of antibiotic resistance is characterized as a process whereby bacteria, quote, learn to, quote, outsmart antibiotics with frustrating regularity. Anthropomorphism with an emphasis on forethought is also behind the common misconception that organisms behave as they do in order to enhance the long-term well-being of their species. Once again, a consideration of the actual mechanics of natural selection should reveal why this is fallacious. So it makes total sense that a misconception is that organisms behave the way they do in order to enhance this long-term well-being of their species, when that's not actually occurring whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's a random process that's occurring, and to anthropomorphize that process, to imply intentionality, just doesn't align with what we know about how population genetics work, how random mutation works. It just doesn't conform to that whatsoever.
Rosenberg kind of hits it a little bit, and he says that I think, to sum up what he's claiming, he said we even anthropomorphize our own fucking thinking, because he pushes back on representationalism, and he's a little bit of an eliminativist, but not the kind that says there's no consciousness, but the kind that says that we can't reify these things. Like, for instance, if I get hungry and all of a sudden I think, there's ham in the fridge, I'm going to go make a sandwich, right? Or if I'm a frog and I see a black object move by, I think, oh, that's a fly, I'm going to catch it. Well, while I'm walking up to the kitchen to make the sandwich, I will probably be thinking about Danny while I'm walking up there, right? Or standing for truth or logical, but I won't be thinking about making a sandwich. In fact, Sober kind of makes a point here that I could play, that we don't think as much as we think we think. That basically there's this happenstance events, and it triggers something, and then we pretty much buy a program, sort of run up and make a fucking sandwich, and the whole time we're thinking about something totally different, right? That's why you can't remember sometimes how you got to work when you get there. It's like, how the fuck did I get? Because you were thinking, right?
I want to read one more thing, and then I'll stop reading. Okay. But like in the section, he pulls a quote from a post from NIH, which
microbes.
Yeah, exactly. He pulls this quote from NIH, which is like not formulated good at all. And then he rewrites it himself to more effectively describe what's going on. So the first quote is like the inaccurate quote that's posted on NIH. So they say, quote, as microbes evolve, they adapt to their environment. If something stops them from growing or spreading, such as an antimicrobial, they evolve new mechanisms to resist the antimicrobials by changing their genetic structure. They change their genetic structure. Right. Changing the genetic structure ensures that the offspring of the resistant microbes are also resistant. And he's like, okay, this is like completely wrong. And if we were to reword it accurately, then he rewords it to say this, that bacteria that cause disease exist in large populations, and not all individuals are alike. If some individuals happen to possess genetic features that make them resistant to antibiotics, these individuals will survive the treatment while the rest are gradually killed off. As a result of their greater survival, the resistant individuals will leave more offspring than susceptible individuals, such that the proportion of the resistant individuals will increase each time a new generation is produced. When only the descendants of the resistant individuals are left, the population of bacteria can be said to have evolved resistance to the antibiotics. That's a much more appropriate way of framing it, and clarifies these nuanced issues that were wrong in the previous quote.
And that sums up natural selection too.
That's exactly right. Yeah. But this is an important part, that even amongst like more sophisticated individuals that have a science background, there are confusions in this topic, and like the way that the terminology is used, like the antimicrobials change, like they're changing their genetic structure, like that the bacteria are changing their genetic structure. They're not changing their genetic structure technically. They're not making a conscious, intentional effort to change it to survive. That's not happening. And when we imply that, it allows creationists and others to be able to use that to say, I see intentionality. Yeah. There must be a being that's involved. That's what I don't like.
Yeah, and in their defense, all of our language involves that sort of thing, right? So it's very difficult. I mean, he had to strain in order to keep, the intention out of the fucking language. It's
that's right. That's right.
And it's that way with theory of mind and consciousness too. When you start looking into theory of mind and consciousness, you're constantly stumbling on this. The way language has had us think about what a mind is and what consciousness is, and they can't seem to separate it. Well, Alex Rosenberg is a scientist like myself, and what we do is we look at things as purely one big, huge Cartesian universe with particles bumping into each other, and we start there and try to construct, not reduce, but construct what is going on from that perspective. And when you look at natural selection that way, when you look at what is really happening in, one particular moment of time in a population, and then you extrapolate that to, thousands of or millions of years or whatever, you start to get the picture of what's really going on. And I wanted to play this Rosenberg part.
Yeah, go for it.
I think
while you cue that up, I just want to say that I can understand why folks like Otangelo or others tend to it's so easy to get locked into we build these machines, we have blueprints, your brain is searching to find intentionality and to be able to anthropomorphize things. And so when we have this kind of language that helps to allow somebody to think that way, I can understand why people have these viewpoints, but they're just inherently flawed. So
it's how we operate on a daily basis,
Yeah.
So it's kind of operational. Rosenberg also pushes back on genetic determinism. The blueprint. The genes are a blueprint. It's just not like that at all. There's this thing, that is the genome, but then it's in an environment that is the zygote. That's in an environment that is the mama. That's in another environment that could be a local bar, as in my case. But no, my mom didn't drink, actually. I can't claim fetal alcohol syndrome.
Okay, good. Okay.
She was one of those people that when she drank, she got really sick from it. It turned it into acetaldehyde. And so she got flushed, so she could never drink. And she was married to a raging alcoholic.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Anyway, let's play this.
The denial that the frog, or we for that matter, think about flies instead of some never to be expressed disjunction of flies or BBs or little black dots or is one that we should take with utmost seriousness. The disjunction problem is not an objection to teleosemantics. It's a fact of life for biological creatures like us. As for Jerry, it turns out he's done us a favor. He's shown that the real consequence of rejecting a Darwinian approach to the mind is to reject a Darwinian theory of phylogenetic evolution. This forces us to take seriously a notion that otherwise would not have had much of a chance, that when it comes to the nature of mental states, indeterminacy rules. This is an insight that should have the most beneficial effect on freeing cognitive neuroscience from demands on the adequacy of its theories that it could never meet.
Anyway, that was
fascinating. That's a profound statement. I mean, what's this guy's name? Rosenberg?
Alex Rosenberg. I linked this particular video in the description along with everything else we've talked about, including Gregory's paper. I didn't put links to Gregory's paper, but I gave you the name and the year and all that. You could find it. So, he is really an amazing man. He wrote a book called let's see, what the hell is it? If I have it here, is it Sober? No, I'm trying to find it. Oh my God!
Looks like he's at Duke right now. I don't know if that's where he was before, but
Rosenberg. Let's see. I can't find how to quit worrying about something and embrace molecular biology or something like that. Something about Darwinism. I forget what the name of the book is. I just had it up. What do I do with all my? I have so many windows. Let's see here. I'll try to find it. I can't. God damn. Anyway.
Oh, this guy's got some good pubs. He's got a book, Philosophical Challenges for Scientism and How to Meet Them.
Yep. Let's see here. Danny. Okay. Darwinism. Let's see. What the hell was it?
Darwinism as philosophy. Can the universal acid be contained? No, maybe not. I'm looking at his. Oh, he debated William Lane Craig.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, let's see here.
He's got these are book sections. Academic articles, books. His books include. How old is the book? His books include An Atheist's Guide to Reality. He's got The Philosophy of Science, a Contemporary Approach. Reduction and Mechanism.
Yeah.
Philosophy of Biology. Oh, I already read that. Philosophy of Science, a Contemporary Introduction. I already read that. Darwinian Reductionism, or How to Stop Worrying and Love Molecular Biology.
That one, yeah. That's what I'm looking for. What is the beginning of that? Darwinian Reductionism?
Darwinian Reductionism, or How to Stop Worrying and Love Biology. Oh my God, that has a very who wrote what's the name of the movie? It's like How I Learned to Love the Bomb.
Oh yeah, the Peter Sellers and who the hell was it?
What was the name of that?
Stanley Kubrick. That was Kubrick's movie, right?
Love the Bomb. Yeah, I think it was Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah, and
one of
Peter Sellers created a couple characters on his own.
So it's Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. And so his book is Darwinian Reductionism, or How to Stop Worrying and Love Molecular Biology. So that's definitely a play off of like Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah,
The name of that book.
Oh, I have it right here. I will go ahead.
That's hilarious. I'm gonna look this guy up.
He's got some good stuff. And he, I really like the fact that he will admit to scientism. It's like there are so many things. Like if you look at intentionality in humans, if you start out looking at us as blobs of goo, squeaking at each other, and you think about intention from those terms, it seems like you can frame a lot of philosophical problems very quickly and make sense of them and come up with conclusions very easily. And that's why I like starting from that standpoint. I always look at like if I see my my relatives having a big fight about some little family problem, I look at them as two little blobs of goo squeaking at each other first.
Look, if you're a determinist, like ultimately, like, I mean, I guess it depends on if you're like a soft or hard determinist, but even if you're a soft determinist, technically you acknowledge scientism, because you're saying everything really results from science. And like, you could be like, well, what about philosophy? What about logic? You could say all those derive from brain chemistry, which can be understood through science. So I can understand.
I look at it.
I can understand that. Yeah. I mean, in that respect, I mean, I typically do not consider that I prescribe to scientism, but I am a determinist, and in that respect, you could consider me, prescribing to scientism. So
yeah. But in the beginning of that clip, he said that flies, or for that matter, humans, don't think about as much as we think we are thinking, right? We operate a little bit differently than that. And there's just a whole philosophy of mind thing that launches from that.
I see Danny's in the side chat. Danny.
Yeah, I'm sure Danny's unhappy.
Why not? I mean, I know you don't want to, but like, I'm fine if you wanted to let Danny in here, but like, don't
Danny. Let me in. Okay, vampires always ask to be let in, and you're not supposed to.
Okay. Did Danny say he wants to come in?
I don't know.
No. Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm about ready to shoot her in the head anyway. But
that's fine. I mean, I got a lot of good info on this, and I'm actually, maybe we can continue this discussion.
Yeah.
Like, cause what would be nice is to actually pull up Fodor's paper and go through some of that in relationship to some of these other papers. I know you've already done some of this before, but
I've got Fodor's paper completely highlighted to death.
Yeah, I bet.
So I've got that all here. But yeah, that would be, we could go through that and maybe have Danny in at the end of that. So
because I think I actually, like, I understand Danny's positions, but the more I think about it, the more I'm like, I do think that we can distinguish between those coextensive traits, and I don't think it's reasonable to say, oh, is it the heart beating or the heart pumping blood? There's just no way of knowing that. I'm not. I think I can make an argument against that. So
all the other parts of the theory will tell you that, but with statistics alone, we can determine whether something is drift or whether it is selected. Okay, we can look at it. And if something is constant across many, many organisms or species, you could do it at the population level, or you could do it across species. You could do it at the kingdom level. And if you see that, you know that it was selected, period. And you come to a full stop there. And that's the important part. From the statistics, we can figure out a great deal. And we can model a great deal with these Frankensteinian population genetic models we come up with. And we can figure a lot of stuff out. But then if you want to really look at a particular beetle and you want to ask questions about the spots on his back, well, then you're going to have to get out some more tools. you're not going to answer all the questions with this law like mathematics.
Yeah, but in all of these discussions, we're all dealing with probabilities. And so we're never going to be able to say with absolute certainty. I mean, I guess some things we can.
Well, I was thinking about gravity, okay? We have a law of gravity, right? Or we have, these equations for gravity. But if you drop a feather and a bowling ball in an environment with air, okay, how do you figure out how fast they're going to fall, right? You can't just use the law of gravity to figure out how fast a feather is going to fall in, our atmosphere, right? So, I mean, it's the same complaint. You're going to have to know more about, feathers and air and resistance and a whole bunch of other shit in order to apply that law of gravity to the feather.
Yeah, I agree.
So
yeah, I agree.
So that's why I kind of look at Fodor and Danny as little blobs of jello, kind of like a wiener, that are making squeaking noises. And I'm saying it's irrelevant. That wasn't very charitable.
I mean, ultimately, we should be able to distinguish between like the pumping of the blood and the beating of the heart through the fitness aspects, because if the pumping of the heart and the pumping of the heart and the beating of the heart and the pumping of the blood in the heart are like 100% coextensive. They can never be a beating heart without a part that pumps blood. Then I'm not quite sure what we're even talking about. Because then it doesn't mean it has no meaning to me.
Well, if you look back at some insects and some arthropods, some other animals, they circulate their blood by their muscles, by moving around. And there's no beating of the heart there. And if you look across all animals, you're going to find vast differences in the noise that the heart makes. And I use this example that, okay, if you looked at a heart, a pumping heart that makes a noise that beats, right? And you put that thing in an environment where there's a predator with super hearing, and he can find you based on your heartbeat, you are very quickly going to see hearts that don't beat or don't thump selected for. And you could, so if we look across species and we see this variation in the noise they make, we can pretty much rule noise out as the thing that was selected. Okay, we know, I mean, it's common sense, right? That the reason they use these examples because they hit us in the common sense and they try to,
yeah, I understand.
They try to steal a point, right? It's just like a creationist.
It's throwing a monkey wrench into the plan. They're like trying to provide a thought experiment that like may be difficult to answer, but the reality is I think it can be answered. And I think that the fact that many biologists have answered this and have not noted that they don't think Fodor's arguments are compelling is also supportive evidence for that.
Yep. Okay. Want to end?
Sure. Yeah. How long that was okay. Like we went like about an hour.
Hour and 20 minutes.
And we go like a long time. It loses people's
hour 12 minutes. Yeah.
Lose people's interest. But anyways, I enjoy talking about this, and if I put a link to the paper in the side chat, so if anybody wants to look at that,
the Gregory paper.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I put the name of it and the year in the description, so you could also Google it.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, it looks like it's open source right now. So there, I'll just put it in there again in case anybody wants it. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna shoot her in the head.
Right on. Yep.
Goodbye, cruel world.